My name is Rachel Coleman, and I'm 32 years old. For 3 years, I was married into a family that made it very clear I was never really one of them. I was the daughter-in-law they tolerated, the one my mother-in-law introduced with a pause before my name, like she was still deciding if I deserved it. When my marriage ended, she didn't hide her relief. She celebrated it, actually, in front of everyone who would listen. What she didn't know was that her celebration was about to be interrupted by something she never saw coming, and by someone she definitely didn't expect. The backyard was strung with lights from my former brother-in-law's engagement party, the kind of gathering I probably shouldn't have gone to, except my son still had cousins here, still had a grandmother who loved him, even if she'd never quite loved me. I was refilling my water glass near the drink table when I heard her voice rise above the music, clear and deliberate, aimed at no one and everyone at once. Honestly, my mother-in-law, Patricia, said, raising her glass slightly toward a cluster of relatives, leaving that woman was the best decision my son ever made. Best thing that ever happened to this family. A few cousins laughed under their breath. My former sister-in-law glanced over at me, half wincing, half waiting to see what I'd do. I felt every eye in that backyard shift toward me at once, waiting for the reaction they clearly expected. I stood there holding my glass, and for a moment I let myself go back 3 years. Back to the beginning of a marriage everyone else seemed to understand better than I did. Patricia had never approved of me, not from the first dinner where she asked, in front of my then-fiancé, whether I'd really thought this through. It only escalated from there. She showed up unannounced at our apartment with new curtains she thought suited the space better. She called my husband, Ethan, every single day, sometimes twice, filling his ear with quiet, persistent doubts, dressed up as concern. When we struggled financially in our second year, she was the one who suggested, gently but constantly, that maybe Ethan had married beneath his potential. I watched my husband slowly absorb her narrative the way water absorbs into fabric, invisible until suddenly everything is soaked through. By the time our marriage ended, the story Patricia had been writing for years had fully replaced the truth. I was the woman who'd held him back. I was the reason he seemed tired, distant, unhappy. Nobody asked why he'd started staying late at his mother's house 4 nights a week during our last year together. Nobody asked why the doubts that ended our marriage sounded suspiciously like Patricia's exact words. I simply became the villain in a story I hadn't written, and by the time the divorce was final, even people who once liked me had quietly rewritten their memories to fit her version. Patricia wasn't finished, and I should have known she wouldn't be. She turned toward me now, fully, her smile sharpening into something more performative. I mean, Rachel, you understand, don't you? A mother knows when someone isn't right for her son. She said it sweetly, the way she said all her cruelest things, wrapped in concern, so no one could call it what it actually was. Ethan's aunt nodded along, murmuring something about how some people just aren't built for marriage. And I watched 2 cousins exchange a look I recognized instantly, the kind reserved for someone about to be picked apart for entertainment. Even my former sister-in-law, who used to text me memes at midnight, stayed quiet, sipping her drink, unwilling to spend her standing in this family defending mine. I ran the calculation I'd learned to run years ago in this exact backyard. If I raised my voice, if I said one true thing about the 4 nights a week Ethan spent at his mother's house instead of home with me, I'd become the bitter ex-wife making a scene at an engagement party. Patricia would love that. She'd tell that story for years. So instead, I smiled, small and composed, and took a slow sip of my water, letting the silence stretch just slightly longer than was comfortable, giving myself 3 full seconds before I let myself feel anything at all. What none of them knew, standing there so pleased with themselves, was that I hadn't spent the last 8 months falling apart the way Patricia clearly wanted to believe. I'd spent them building something quietly, carefully, the same way I'd learned to survive this family in the first place, by keeping the parts of my life that actually mattered far away from their opinions. 6 months after the divorce, I'd started dating again, slowly, cautiously, and then not so cautiously at all, once I met a man named Marcus Whitfield. He wasn't loud about affection the way Ethan had once been in the early years, back before his mother's voice became louder than his own. Marcus was steady instead. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He met my son twice before he ever asked to see me a 3rd time because he wanted to be sure he was someone worth introducing into a child's life, not just mine. I hadn't told Patricia any of this, hadn't told most of Ethan's family, because I understood something now that I hadn't fully understood during my marriage. This family didn't just dislike me. They needed a villain in order to feel united, and for 3 years, I had been convenient enough to fill that role. I wasn't interested in handing them a new chapter to pick apart, a new relationship to inspect for flaws, the way they'd inspected every dinner I ever cooked and every decision I ever made. So I'd stayed quiet, let them believe what was convenient, and focused instead on building a life Patricia couldn't touch, couldn't rewrite, and definitely couldn't take credit for. Patricia was still riding the momentum of her own performance, turning to refill her wine, clearly pleased with the reaction she'd gotten, when the side gate creaked open behind us. I heard my son's laughter first, high and delighted, and then his voice calling out the way it always did when he was excited about something. "Mom! Marcus said we could come early!" I turned, and there he was, walking up the path in jeans and a soft gray sweater, holding my son's hand loosely, the two of them clearly mid-conversation about something that had them both grinning. Marcus hadn't planned on arriving for another hour, not until after the toasts, but my son had apparently talked him into leaving early, too impatient to wait. The backyard went quiet in that particular way it does when a script suddenly stops matching what people expected to see. Patricia's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Ethan, who'd been standing near the drink table pretending not to listen to his mother's performance, turned fully around, his expression shifting from mild boredom to something sharper, more alert, the moment he saw who was walking through that gate holding my son's hand like it belonged there. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice easy as he reached us, my son already darting off toward the dessert table with the confidence of a kid who'd been here before. "You're early." "He talked me into it," Marcus said, smiling, resting a hand lightly at the small of my back, easy, familiar, the kind of gesture that told an entire room everything it needed to know without a single word of explanation. Patricia's face had gone through 3 expressions in the span of 5 seconds, confusion sliding into recognition, sliding into something close to alarm, because she recognized the name even if she'd never met the face. Ethan had mentioned Marcus once, months ago, in a tone dripping with disdain, and apparently that detail had made it back to his mother after all. "This is Marcus," I said simply, watching Patricia's grip tighten around her glass. "We've been together for almost 5 months now." "You didn't mention you were seeing someone," Patricia said, her voice thinner than it had been minutes earlier, the performance draining out of it in real time. "You didn't ask," I said evenly. "You were too busy telling everyone how relieved you were that Ethan left me. Funny, since it was actually the opposite. I was the one who filed. I was the one who finally stopped waiting for you to stop calling him every night of our marriage." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward his mother, and for the first time all evening, Patricia had nothing composed left to say, her carefully rewritten story collapsing in real time in front of the very family she'd spent years convincing. The backyard had gone fully silent now, the kind of silence that used to make my chest tighten when I was still married into this family, except this time, it wasn't pressing down on me at all. Patricia's mouth opened slightly, then closed, like she was searching for a version of this moment she could still control and coming up empty. "That's not," she started, glancing at Ethan, then back at me. "That's not how it happened." "It's exactly how it happened," I said, my voice calm, steady, no longer performing restraint for an audience that had never once extended me the same courtesy. "You spent 3 years deciding I wasn't good enough for your son, and 2 years after that deciding I was the reason he was unhappy. You just never stopped to ask why he needed you every single night to be happy at all." Ethan's aunt looked away, suddenly very interested in her drink. My former sister-in-law's eyes met mine, something like quiet respect flickering there for the first time in months. Marcus stayed close, steady, unbothered by the tension, his hand still resting lightly at my back like he had nowhere else he'd rather be standing. I didn't wait for Patricia to recover, didn't need her apology or her acknowledgement to feel like the moment was complete. I called my son over, watched him come running with cake already smudged at the corner of his mouth, and I took his hand while Marcus fell into step beside us, easy and unhurried. "Thank you for having us," I said to the group at large, my tone pleasant, final, the same tone I might have used at any ordinary gathering, because that's exactly what I wanted this to become in their memory. Ordinary, forgettable, nothing they could dine out on for years. We walked back through the side gate we'd come in through, My son chattering about the dessert table, Marcus laughing softly beside him. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I left that family's backyard without carrying a single piece of their story home with me. Driving home that night, my son already half asleep in the back seat, I thought about how long I'd let Patricia's version of my life go unchallenged, simply because I didn't think the truth needed an audience. I understand now that some truths don't need to be defended loudly. They just need time and the right moment to speak entirely for themselves. If you've ever been written into a story you never agreed to, quietly underestimated by people who were supposed to love you already know how it feels when the truth finally, calmly sets the record straight.